It has been a year of sirens. This one at 6:29 today, piercing a fragile dawn like a dagger, marks the moment of the first attack exactly 1 year ago. But the night has never ended, and nor have the sirens for Israel or the region. If anything, it's getting darker. The families of the hostages are the raw conscience of Israel. Here they march on the beleaguered home of a besieged prime minister. It is almost biblical in its aching simplicity. Bring our people back. And then this, a poignant reminder that a year has passed. Nimrod Cohen, taken exactly 1 year ago by Hamas, and of course he's now no longer 19, he's 20 years old. They represent the vulnerability of a nation that had thought it was impregnable. The government's journey of the last year is to prove to itself and to the world that Israel can once again defend itself, whatever the human cost, to others, especially to Palestinians. That it is better to be feared than loved. Even he agrees, and his daughter Liri is still a hostage of Hamas.
No peace in this time. We need now to talk, to release and see the enemy. What's Iran? What Hezbollah want from us? Which peace with them? Why they attacked 1 year? Ask Hezbollah why they're attacking.
It could be a forever war. It could go on forever and ever.
No, till we finish the situation with them.
But where does it finish? A year ago, Hamas live-streamed its pogrom. It was the darkest day for the Jewish state since the Holocaust. It brought back all the fears that the existence of Israel was supposed to have vanished. And it brought vengeance against Hamas in Gaza and now Hezbollah in Lebanon, with tens of thousands of civilians caught up in the charnel house of war. The more Israel lashed out, the more isolated it became on the world stage. But today, Prime Minister Netanyahu again claimed that he is fighting for our values.
Since that black day, we have been fighting. This is the war of our existence, the war of resurrection. This is how I would like to officially call the war. We will end the war when we complete all the goals we set.
Another huge explosion in Beirut overnight. Fireballs reminiscent of Lebanon's darkest days in the civil war. But Israel's all-out assault on Hezbollah, sophisticated and brutal, is popular here. It has given Prime Minister Netanyahu a political lifeline, but at what price for the entire region? The barricaded street outside the Prime Minister's house echoes to an exhausted rendition of the Israeli anthem for a country that is both victim and bully. Shir's father Keith turned 65 as a hostage.
I want to think that also Bibi wants my dad to come back home. I know everyone in Israel wants, doesn't matter if they are on the right side or on the left side, but I know there are priorities, and I know that it's not the main priority now. Not for the Prime Minister, and not for the rest of the government.
But it's your priority, obviously.
Of course. I miss my dad so much, and I worried about him. And it's been a year, and it's too much.
No side has a monopoly on inhumanity and suffering here, and tragedy has unfinished business across borders. Well, in the year since the October the 7th attacks, Gaza has changed beyond all recognition. The sheer scale of destruction caused by relentless airstrikes and street battles between Israeli forces and Hamas fighters is visible from space. Using satellite photos and testimony from the ground, Harry Fawcett has been tracing what's happened over the last 12 months to Gaza and to its people.
Within hours of the attacks that killed hundreds of Israeli civilians, Israel was striking Gaza's still recognizable cityscapes. 3 weeks later, troops went in. A war that was already exacting a horrifying price from Gaza's civilians would only get worse. In those early days, Channel 4 News first met Lina Hamad. She'd been due to give birth on October the 7th. Instead, she fled her home that morning, battling labour pains for 10 days, making it south to Khan Yunis, where she had her twins.
I'm afraid for my kids in case they get sick. You can see they're lying on the ground. My older children used to sleep in beds. They were vaccinated, they were clean. Here we have nothing.
The scale of Israel's air campaign would be like nothing Gaza's people had experienced in previous wars. Evidenced in an early strike on what Israel said were Hamas tunnels in Jabalia. 200 people killed as their residential blocks were leveled. This mapping, provided to us by researchers at Forensic Architecture, shows Gaza subsumed in destruction, month by unrelenting month. The UN says 2/3 of the buildings have now been damaged or destroyed. Just as inexorable, the killing. Nearly 42,000 dead so far, says the Hamas-run health ministry. It's feared thousands more could lie unrecovered, unrecorded under Gaza's ruins. Israel says 17,000 of the dead were what it calls terror operatives. The health ministry says Israel has killed the same number of children. The war has caused displacement on a population level. 1.9 million of Gaza's 2.1 million people forced from their homes. Most of them into a cycle of repeated flight, driven by Israeli evacuation orders or the bombs and bullets themselves.
We saw many people dead in front of us. Their stomachs were cut open. We don't know where our parents are now.
This forensic architecture map shows the growing pattern of evacuation zones in yellow through the year. The borders of the blue, so-called humanitarian zone, also shifting, at the end of August occupying just 11% of Gaza's territory. For the displaced, an existence dominated by finding food and avoiding disease. The UN says 96% of Gaza's people are at risk of crisis levels of food insecurity. At the outset, Israel said its aim was to destroy Hamas as a military and political force. It says it's killed the group's military leader, dozens of commanders, and defeated its last functioning brigade. But just this weekend, civilians were again fleeing Jabalia, where Israel said it was once more fighting a resurgent Hamas. Israel's other official war aim, the return of the remaining hostages, remains unfulfilled. The brief flurry of optimism around November's ceasefire and releases a world away. So too, the images of what Gaza was before October the 7th compared to what it's become. Deeper still, the devastation to hundreds of thousands of individual lives. This weekend we met Lina again. Displaced 4 times, she and her family now living in a tent in Deir al-Balah. Her baby daughter Rama suffering from malnutrition.
October 7th didn't make me happy at all. Our lives were fine. Our children were getting ready for kindergarten, my husband was getting ready for work, and suddenly life stopped. If I'd have known all this would happen, I'd have stayed in my house and died there.
When we first met Lina, she said her hope was to see her babies grow before her eyes, away from war. A hope that seems still more distant now than it was a year ago.
Well, it's been another night and day of bombardment here in Beirut, as Israel claimed it was carrying out targeted strikes in the southern suburbs where Hezbollah's leader and top echelons have been killed. There was another strike near Lebanon's only international airport. Our foreign affairs correspondent Secunda Kamani is with me here. So,
well, Christian, we've been seeing and hearing some of those further strikes in Beirut in the southern suburbs, as you say. But amongst the deadliest incidents in the past 24 hours is one much closer to the border, in which 10 Lebanese firefighters are reported to have been killed in an Israeli strike on a municipal building. Meanwhile, the Israeli army have confirmed the deaths of 2 more of its soldiers in combat. They've also issued further evacuation notices to yet more towns and villages and warned people in Lebanon not to approach the coast, not to go into the sea in the south of the country. A year into this conflict, it only seems to be expanding.
Like a terrifying and deadly firework display. Secondary blasts resound throughout the night sky above Beirut after an Israeli strike. Israel says it's been hitting Hezbollah ammunition depots in the south of the city. In the light of day, we're heading northeast, out of Beirut, escorted by Hezbollah members through the Bekaa Valley, the group's birthplace. It's still one of their strongholds and has been targeted by hundreds of Israeli strikes. At the site of one, we meet relatives of Ali Jafar, an elderly victim.
They struck a home, a petrol station. You can see the damage the strike caused. There was a place that fixes cars over there, a barber shop. There was nothing else here. Film it and see for yourself.
Israel accuses Hezbollah of hiding amongst the population. In this Shia Muslim-dominated district, support for Hezbollah, both the political party and armed group, is high. But locals insist there was no military target.
Everyone knows we support Hezbollah in these Shia neighbourhoods, but there are no actual weapons or fighters. We all have regular jobs. Shia support Hezbollah just like Christians or Sunnis have their own groups.
Of course we want the war to end, another man tells me.
Just get down. Get against the wall, you get down.
Then suddenly, an explosion rings out.
That was a strike, not too far away. We had been hearing reports of drones in the skies above the city just a little earlier on.
As we leave the scene, a large plume of smoke is visible. And we can still hear the buzz of the drone above the ancient Roman ruins of the city of Baalbek. Many inhabitants have already fled, but not everyone.
What God has written will happen. We won't leave our land.
Israel wants to occupy us, but they shouldn't even dream about it. We're as solid as the Baalbek pillars.
Some people in Lebanon are supporting Hezbollah in their war against Israel. Some say they were wrong to start the war. What do you think?
If Israel wants peace, we want peace. If they want war, we want war.
But further east, on the border with Syria, there's a mass exodus. Children stumbling along, families clutching whatever they can carry. Around 400,000 have already fled from Lebanon into Syria. Many as Syrian refugees who had escaped a brutal regime and bloody war, but are now reluctantly returning home. Seda is carrying a sack with her children's winter clothes. Everything else had to be left behind.
We decided to return to Syria out of fear. We weren't able to sleep because of the jets. They kept bombing Lahia. It was frightening. Our children are getting traumatized. They kept asking, Mum, have the jets hit us? Mum, will they hit again?
The refugees are forced to cross on foot by this massive crater on the road. Israel struck the border, accusing Hezbollah of using it to smuggle in weapons. For Allah, a Lebanese farmer though, this is the only way to get his family out. He's heading for Jordan. She can't walk. What shall I do? How can I stay in Lebanon, he asks. She cries and cries and cries every day. Cradling his daughter Noor, he heads across the border. The young victims of a deepening crisis.
Well, Sek, I mean, you have been on all fronts of this war over the last 12 months. If you step back for a moment, what are your reflections?
Well, Christian, I mean, I think turning to Lebanon particularly, for much of the past year, events here, the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, look to be really something of a sideshow compared to events in Gaza. And it is worth still underlining that on a daily basis, more Palestinians are being killed in Gaza than people are being killed here. But now, certainly, the conflict in Lebanon is very much at centre stage. And The Israeli army insists that its fighting here is not going to be open-ended, but when you look at what's happening in Gaza, it already seems to be entering a kind of forever war there, and real fears that something similar could now develop here.
Second Kamani. Well, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, joins us now from Westminster. Thank you for joining us. Foreign Secretary, there is war in Gaza, in Lebanon, and Israel is planning its attack on Iran. You've been calling for a ceasefire, and it seems nobody is listening.
Well, look, the whole international community has been calling for a ceasefire, and here in the UK, we were calling for a ceasefire in opposition, and I came into office and repeated that call in relation to the Israel-Gaza theatre, and of course now in relation to Lebanon, because we believe that a political settlement that sees Hezbollah move back beyond the Litani River and meet the obligations under Resolution 1701 is preferable to war and to conflict. And so, of course, I'll be back in the region this week urging restraint and people to step back from the brink. We do not need regional war that would be catastrophic, I think, for the Israelis, for the Middle East and for the wider global community, and would cause tremendous strain on all of our economies.
But isn't the trouble that a lot of people think your position and the Americans, which is quite similar, is a mixed message? Because on the one hand you're calling for a ceasefire, and on the other hand you're saying we support Israel's right to self-defense, and they take that as a green light to carry on with their attacks.
Look, the whole global community wants to see a ceasefire, and we in the UN just a few days ago came together urging a 21-day pause. That was not accepted by Israel. And of course the international community recognises that Iran particularly, with the missiles that they have rained down on Israel, would of course cause a wider escalation in a regional war. That's why British planes supported Israel in our desire to stop those missiles landing on Tel Aviv back in April. It's why we had planes over the skies again just a few days ago, and it's why Iran, supporting proxies, supporting Hezbollah, supporting Hamas, supporting the Houthis, remains a threat not just to the region but to the wider global security. So we're absolutely clear that of course we support Israel in terms of their right to self-defense, but we've always been clear it has to be within international humanitarian law, and that is why, with regret, I had to make the decision I did a few weeks ago to suspend arms that could be used in Gaza because our export licensing regime is amongst the very robust in the world, and that assessment had been crossed in terms of a clear risk.
But the Prime Minister has ruled out going further, as President Macron is calling for. I mean, Israel is also now being accused of breaking international humanitarian law in its war in Lebanon, as well as the multiple allegations in Gaza. Why are you sending them anything?
Look, I do reject the suggestion that we should have a complete arms embargo of Israel. And the reason I reject that is because if those missiles landed on Tel Aviv and there was a tremendous loss of civilian life, like night follows day, I'm afraid we would be in regional war. And I do think we have to reckon with the tyranny that is Iran. We can't, on the one hand, march and campaign against the tyranny that the Iranians are raining down on their own people, never mind the region, and then on the other hand say we should leave Israel defenseless. I do not believe we should leave Israel defenseless from the Houthis, from Hezbollah. But of course, in terms of being the British Foreign Secretary, our country must never be in breach of international humanitarian law. Our export licensing regime set up by the last government has to meet its obligation. And so with regret, I've made that decision in relation to Gaza because it is the right thing to do on the basis of our law.
OK, but is it just Israel that has the right to self-defense, or everybody in this region? I mean, Israel is about to strike Iran in the coming days. Does Iran have a right to self-defense?
Look, of course, I am urging restraint on the Israelis. I would like to see a line drawn under further activity, and we do not want to see escalatory behaviour because, as I say, we risk a wider war that would be catastrophic for Israel.
But
and
does it have a right to self-defence?
Christian, it's true also that in relation to Lebanon, Israel has been bogged down in Lebanon before in a ground war that's gone on for years, that's led to a lot of loss of life, both in Lebanon and in Israel. And what we don't want to see is Lebanon tip over into something close to Syria, which is a haven for terrorist groups. So for all of those reasons, we continue to say that a diplomatic solution is what is required. I will be in the region again this week urging the same, working with G7 partners. You saw the G7 statement last week saying that it's only diplomacy that will get us out of this. I will continue to work with partners day after day until we bring this crisis to an end. Diplomacy fails until it succeeds, as frustrating as it is.
Given what you said about Iran, why hasn't Britain prescribed the Revolutionary Guard?
Well, in coming into government, we are looking at state threats. We don't comment on prescription, of course, but can I say that we are looking very definitely at this and how, when we're talking about a state-sponsored organisation as opposed to a terrorist cell organisation, how it is best dealt with. And of course we're looking at it. It's also right to say that Iran is subject to many, many sanctions under the last government, and of course, particularly in the context of their nuclear ambitions, you would expect us to be very, very clear on that issue.
I mean, when you think about the last year and the mass killing that has taken place, and now on so many fronts, you know, in a very short period of time here, another 2,000 people dead in Lebanon. You know, it is, you know, the 7th of October, one of those moments in history, like 9/11 perhaps, that is going to define the coming decades.
Well, on this particular day, I keep in my heart those hostages and their loved ones and families. I'm particularly thinking of Emily Damari, the British hostage, and her mother and her family. And yes, I do think this has been an extremely challenging year for the global community, with war not just in Europe, but war in the Middle East. We are on the brink, and that is why we are urging the communities there to step back from a regional escalation. This has been the most frustrating of year, and it's been a bleak year where over 45,000 people in the region have lost their lives, many of them women and children. But we must do all we can to urge peace, to urge diplomacy, to continue to work together, and to continue to urge both sides in this conflict, not saying there's a moral equivalence, because there cannot be between a terrorist group and an elected government, but to urge both sides to find the necessary 10% to get that hostage deal over the line, to get that ceasefire. That is where we now are, and we need those partners for peace.
Foreign Secretary David Lammy, thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Now, in a statement earlier today, President Biden said that far too many civilians have been killed since the October 7th attacks, adding that Israelis and Palestinians both deserve to live in security, dignity and peace. Let's get the latest from our Washington correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy, who's in Pennsylvania. Siobhan.
Well, I am in the swing state of Pennsylvania. There's about a month to go before the election. You might expect to see one of the two candidates roaming around, but neither Donald Trump nor Kamala Harris have scheduled events today, both in observance of the anniversary of October the 7th. Earlier, though, President Biden held a small remembrance service inside the White House alongside his wife, the First Lady Jill Biden, and a rabbi who led a prayer. After that, Joe Biden lit a candle and the three held a moment's silence in memory of those who lost their lives that day. The president didn't give an address, but earlier in a statement, he reiterated his support for Israel's right to defend itself. And he also described this as a dark day for Palestinians. And he said he would not stop working for a ceasefire. The mere fact, though, that he hasn't managed to achieve a ceasefire, I think speaks to the real lack of influence that Joe Biden has with President Netanyahu, not just in Gaza, but now also too in Lebanon. As for the Vice President, we are told that she is due to plant a pomegranate tree later on this afternoon and hold her own service in the grounds of her house in Washington, D.C. Earlier on in her own statement, she said that she would never forget the horror of October the 7th, but she also said, "I am heartbroken over the scale of death and destruction in Gaza over the past year." Now, how much that death and destruction will weigh on the minds of voters in November is still not clear. Certainly her rival Donald Trump will want to use the war against her in the coming days and weeks. Now, Donald Trump himself will hold his own memorial service alongside members of the Jewish community in Florida later on this evening. So many memorial services to mark the anniversary of October the 7th here in America. No campaigning today, but rest assured, campaigning will get underhead proper again tomorrow.
Siobhan Kennedy, thank you very much. Well, the Jordanian Foreign Minister, Ayman Safadi, has been visiting Beirut today, and I managed to grab him for a word earlier. What is your peace proposal to Israel, and will Jordan shoot down missiles if Israel fires at Iran in the coming days?
First of all, we've said it very clearly, unequivocally. His Majesty said it, we in the government said it, that Jordan will not be a battleground for anyone, and we will not allow anybody, to the extent that we can, to violate our sovereignty and threaten the safety of our citizens. That is our priority, and we'll continue to do everything we can to ensure that. And we delivered this message unequivocally to both Iran and Israel, that Jordan will not be a battleground in an action and reaction engagement.
So you will shoot down missiles?
We will do whatever we can within our ability to protect our sovereignty and the safety of our people. And as far as your second part of the question, we've said all Arab countries, not just Jordan, that war will only produce more violence, more destruction, and will not produce security to anybody, not to the Israelis, not to the Palestinians, not to the Lebanese, and nobody else. The only path to peace is ending the Israeli occupation of occupied Arab territory, Palestine, emergence of an independent sovereign Palestinian state on June 4, 1967 lines, with occupied Jerusalem as capital, that would live in peace and security with Israel. We have a peace offer as an Arab country, but we don't have a partner in Israel right now. Our narrative, as I said in New York, our narrative is clear. We want a just and lasting peace that is consistent with international law. That will be the only path to guaranteeing the security of all. Ask Israeli officials what is their narrative, other than the continuation of the wars that we see on Gaza, the West Bank, and
how can you guarantee? Well, that's the picture in Beirut, where the air behind me in the southern suburbs is still thick with smoke. Now over to Matt in Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. Stay safe there. Now, here in Israel, this is a nation still gripped by deep shock and mourning. Just behind me, at the Western Wall, what used to be called the Wailing Wall, Orthodox Jews are praying for the hostages still held in Gaza. The 7th of October is a date forever etched into the national consciousness here. It is exactly a year since nearly 1,200 people were killed when Hamas stormed the border, many of whom were young people gunned down at a music festival. And 101 people are still being held hostage inside Gaza. Our correspondent Alex Thompson has been to the site of that music festival. He's now in Ashkelon. Alex.
Yes, well, air raid sirens sounded today in Sderot, which is not too far from where we are here in Ashkelon on the coast. At least 5 rockets fired again by Hamas in the Gaza Strip into this part of Israel, all of them intercepted. But that, I guess, underlines yet again that Israel has thus far failed to achieve its stated military aim after a year in the Gaza Strip. And we have, of course, in excess of 42,000 people killed there. Well, as you say, it's October the 7th, this side of the fence with Gaza. Attention from the media quite properly focused on the events there exactly a year ago when Hamas broke through that border fence and began attacking the kibbutzes and the Nova Music Festival.
Dawn and the soundtrack, now a eulogy for the Nova Festival a year on. cut at 6:29 precisely, the moment the Hamas attack began. The minute's silence pierced by a woman consumed with grief, attended by paramedics, comforted by Israel's president. Outgoing shelling into nearby Gaza, hammering home this past to present violence. Grief, of course, but defiance also.
This is a war that I think everybody here in Israel understands is a war of no choice. We don't have any choice in this matter. It's a war of national survival.
My dear brother murdered, so for me it's for doing life. I hope the hostages will come back. At least they will be here. But for us, we lost a big part of our hearts, family. So for us, it's forever.
We just need to be strong every day and spread love to the people, to the soldiers.
How does it end, guys? How does this end? How does this finish?
I want to say in a good way, but at the end of the day, a lot of people died and murdered, so it's hard, but we need to be strong every day. And I hope
the hostages are supposed to be back. That is the only reason that we can keep our life.
All of this broadcast live across the nation, a potent and deliberate mix of emotion and politics.
So very clearly the site of the Nova Music Festival has been preserved as a memorial, not least for today, of course. Let's go now, though, to one of the kibbutzes that was also attacked and find out to what extent life has returned there to normal or not.
Yellow ribbons for the 101 hostages line the road to Nir Oz kibbutz close by, where just 6 buildings remain undamaged of 200. 400 people lived here on October the 6th last year. Now 2 remain.
Well, they were kidnapped.
These people here were kidnapped?
Family.
Yeah.
Family Munder and here Yafa Adar was kidnapped.
Right.
And
also kidnapped here.
Also.
And one of them, a founder of this place back in 1955, having fled the Nazis to Israel. Everything he built, now ruined. But listen to this.
They are still our neighbors. And
they are still your neighbors.
They're still our neighbors, and with them we have no choice. They are our neighbors. We have to find a way how to live together with them in peace.
Natan showed me around this ruined ghost kibbutz, past the wrecked house from where a couple used to drive their Palestinian neighbors from Gaza to hospital treatment in Israel. And from another destroyed home next door, you see Gaza, a mile distant. A year to the day, and the pulverizing of the Gaza Strip continues. We left to the rising smoke of airstrikes battering what remains of Khan Yunis, Israel's ruins, Gaza's rubble.
Alex Thompson reporting there. Well, earlier I spoke to the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who today put forward a joint plan for peace in the region, together with the former Palestinian Foreign Minister. Do you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to draw the United States into a confrontation with Iran?
Oh, yeah, I suspect that he does.
That he does?
Yes, I suspect.
And you think that's reckless?
I think that's reckless, but I'm afraid that if Israel will start a war, a comprehensive war against Iran, and it will expand, and Israel will not be in a very comfortable situation, America will join in to help Israel. And that is what Netanyahu believes to be the case, therefore he can afford himself, he thinks, to do, no matter what they say, what he thinks he should do.
And does that make this the most dangerous moment of a very dangerous year?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes. I'm afraid so, yes. Altogether, Iran is a very aggressive, provocative power that threatens the stability of the Middle East. And something needs to be done. But what needs to be done with care, with sensitivity, with responsibility, and with a sense of proportion. And I'm not certain that Netanyahu wants this proportion. He looks at the leadership of the international community, the Western world, and he says, who are they? I'm Bibi Netanyahu.
You're not a fan of Netanyahu, but he has changed the story. And I wonder if that is helping him in the eyes of the Israeli public.
The pagers and the walkie-talkies, whether we assumed responsibility or not, they definitely think that we did it anyway. And the assassination of the targeting of Nasrallah and some other leaders, you know, these are very impressive operations which may make many Israelis very proud, and they can say, wow, Netanyahu is great.
What did you
think? However, they are not game changers.
Would you have ordered the killing of Hassan Nasrallah?
Yes. He killed thousands of people. He was responsible for the killing of thousands of people.
So that is a good thing that Netanyahu has done?
Yeah, not everything that he does is bad. Almost everything that he says is bad.
Do you think that the events of the last few weeks, though, have changed Israel's position and the way it's seen by the rest of the world?
I mean, we have to look at the strategy. What is the strategy of the State of Israel? What does Netanyahu want? What is he going to achieve? And what is the cost of achieving what he wants?
Right. Has the cost of fighting this war against Hamas, measured on the Palestinian side in thousands upon thousands of lives, many of them innocent women and children, has that cost isolated Israel too much and made you therefore more vulnerable?
I'm afraid yes. Question is whether at some point we didn't allow the rage to obsess us beyond a certain restraint and a certain point where it was counterproductive. We should have limited ourselves to the point beyond which the extent, the intensity, the numbers would be counterproductive to the perception of what Israel is all about.
Ehud Olmert, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.